Welcome to the Wednesday Word of the Week. On a recent segment, we looked at Christ's self-emptying of himself, who, being in very nature God, took on the very nature of a servant, was born into the world as a human, and who on surface appearance looked like just every other human, while being in very nature God. Immediately before that, in Paul's little hymn in Philippians chapter 2, he makes a plea for unity and humility and mutual care among the people in the church in Philippi. So I'd like to just read quickly verses 1 through 3 of chapter 2. So if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. That's from the ESV, and I supplied the underlining, just to emphasize the section that we're going to look at today. So the word of the week this week is in that little last bit, and it's the Greek word, huperexontas. And let's take a look at the phrase, that last phrase in Greek. Alate tapeno frosune alelus hegumenoi huperexontas heauton. And I'm going to do something a little strange today. I'm taking the phrase, and underneath I'm going to translate the words in the order in which they're given and break out what was going on here. So rather, in humility, one another, alelus, one another, while considering, hegumenoi, holding above, huperexontas, heauton, yourselves. Very, very kind of broken, jumbled phrasing, but what he's saying to them is, in humility, hold others above yourself in your consideration. When you're looking at the people in your group, in your community, put them ahead of yourself on the list. Pardon me. Let's take a look at the word itself. Huperexontas comes from huper, hyper, above, and echo is I hold or I have. So huperexontas is a participle which means holding or having above. So Paul's admonition is hold one another above yourselves while considering each other. When I think of us, it's like he's saying, when I think of us, I'm going to put you ahead of me. That's the encouragement in the hymn. And I'm going to tell you very plainly, for many years, I struggled with that verse. And a lot of the reason is from, I'm going to use a judgmental term, not great translations. There are some translations out there that phrase it something like this. Always think of others ahead of yourself. Always put others before yourself, something to that extent. And that others used to stick in my craw, because I wanted to know exactly which others was Paul talking about. He like, in the modern context, is he talking about the Taliban? Do they count as the others? White supremacists, Antifa, people who mow their lawn too early on Saturday morning in your neighborhood? Is it just a blanket statement about everyone and anyone? Is what he's saying that anyone who is not me is automatically more important than me to me? That always struck me as a tough row to hoe. But that's the beautiful thing about studying Koine. When we look at the language, we look at the way Paul wrote it, we see something critically important. The object of this humble consideration, when he says, in humility, consider one another above yourselves. The object of this humble consideration is alelus. Let's look at that word. Alelus means one another, and it comes from the word allos, which means different, others of the same kind. So another of the same kind is allos, alous, plural, others of the same kind. There's an alternative that's available, heterous. We get heterosexual, attracted to the opposite sex. Heterous would be others of a different kind. So Paul knows the language, his audience knows the language, he has an alternative available to him. He could have simply said others, or he could have said specifically others of a different kind, but he decided to use the reciprocal pronoun one another. One another. So one another is plural, yourselves is plural, and it sets up this reciprocal dynamic in the community when you're contemplating your relationships within the fellowship, within the body of believers in Philippi, within those who are hearing the letter, those to whom Paul is writing. He says, put the people in your fellowship above yourself. Don't automatically default to you. He's not talking about others outside. He's not talking about from an evangelistic perspective. There are passages elsewhere that talk about those things. But here in Philippians 2, that's not what he's talking about. So, what shall we do with this? What we can extrapolate here is we can look at ourselves as a modern audience and say, pardon me, everyone who is the recipient of Paul's message makes up the one another that he's speaking of when he's writing to the Philippians. We should think of those in our fellowship above ourselves, consider them above ourselves in humility as we interact and live with one another. He also says, right after this verse, let this same mindset be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who being in morphe theou, who being in very nature God, humbled himself, emptied himself, became a servant, etc., that we looked at last time. So, the great news is, Paul was not encouraging me, you, or the Philippians to automatically assume that everything with a pulse that isn't us is more important than us. But he was saying that he would love to see humility and gentleness and compassion and the mindset that was in Christ be in us, so that we might make the decision like Christ did to empty ourselves, humble ourselves, make ourselves into servants, putting others first. Not because they're better than us, not because we're the least among men, but because it shows the mindset of Christ in choosing that emptying and humility. So, great word, huperexontas, holding others above. Which others? Allelous, one another, those who are the recipients of the same message. You can go elsewhere to look for how we're to treat outsiders, the heterous, etc. But for Paul's message to the Philippians, we can extrapolate application for our own lives today and tomorrow, and for all of us who are part of the allelous and the heauton. If this is good for you, please subscribe, share it with a friend, let folks know. The only way that YouTube knows to promote the videos to other people is if they see a response from folks who've watched it. That's the greatest gift you can give any YouTube producer. And I thank you as always for participating, and until next time, charis kai hirene humin, grace and peace to you.